tobacco in this country will be seen in the fullness of time as one of the most important, I suppose, social issues of our generation. I'm proud to say that this Dáil, under the guidance of former Minister Riley, former Minister for Health Riley, have made significant progress in this regard. Upon the enactment of this legislation, Ireland is poised to become only the second country in the world to introduce standardised tobacco packaging as a measure to reduce smoking. We're leading the way.
Can finish your sentence and then
yeah, we're leading the way in an international context in the fight against an extremely harmful drug that has long been deep-rooted in our society. And I move now on your instruction the adjournment of this debate.
Okay, thanks very much, Dáil. Sorry, it's on. Moving on to the private member's business, which is the motion on direct provision. And the first speaker is Deputy Sandra McClellan. And I understand you're sharing your time with Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald.
Maybe I am. Yeah. I'm actually not sure.
All right. Okay. Well, that's agreed. If it's
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Direct provision is a blight on this state. The idea that the needs of people at their most vulnerable could possibly be met by accommodating them in cramped, unsafe and crowded conditions is a disgrace. Asylum seekers are forced to live on €19.10 per week while awaiting a decision by this state on whether they are allowed to stay in Ireland. Direct provision is meant to provide for the welfare needs of asylum seekers and their families, but it does not. The Irish Government participates in all EU directives on asylum except for Directive 2003/9/EC, also known as the Receptive Directive. If it abided by this directive, the Government would have to allow for asylum seekers to participate in the labour market. The refusal to do so has left many families in limbo, relying solely on the state's allowance of €19.10. It also provides a measly €9.60 per week for each child living in these horrendous conditions. What child can be cared for on €9.60 per week? What child can be fed or sent to school on €9.60 per week? The cost of raising a child in Ireland is by no means cheap. A child's well-being, both physical and mental, is not cheap. Securing a decent future for a child is not cheap. Why then has this Government found it fit to expect parents of children in direct provision to provide for their needs, to care for them, to carve out opportunities for their future on €9.60 per week? This is unacceptable, it is wrong, it is shameful. Most asylum seekers spend 3 years in direct provision. A large number have been waiting for 7 years or more. Children have been born in these centres. They have lived their whole lives in the system. Their rights have been infringed upon by a state that has no positive history when it comes to the protection of children under its care. Government Minister Jan O'Sullivan has recently said that children living in direct provision accommodation are being denied a normal family life. Minister O'Sullivan said direct provision accommodation was not a good system. The Minister also noted her concern regarding access to education for children living in direct provision. Children seeking asylum here are entitled to attend primary and secondary school. But because they don't qualify for free fees, they cannot access third-level education. This means that teenagers who complete their Leaving Cert are not able to progress on to college. This is shameful. Why then, if the deplorable insufficiency of this system is recognised by a Government Minister, is the Government not acting immediately to end it? The State has a duty of care to everyone living here. According to the Refuge Council of Ireland, approximately 2,000 children are living in direct provision centres. That's 2,000 children whose basic needs are not being met. That's 2,000 children being failed by this state. 2,000 children whose families were forced to flee war, famine, risk of death or severe punishment, and who came here seeking a better life. Recently, 300 residents at the Kinsale Road Reception and Accommodation Centre on the outskirts of Cork City organised 10 days of protest for an end to this inhumane system. Their voices join a chorus of many. It is time that the government listened. One woman had been in the centre for 9 years and was awaiting a decision on her status. She has 2 young children. This is horrific. This is just one case that acts to highlight the many others. Direct provision centres deny people the right to prepare food for themselves and their children. Access to food is a basic human right. Food is not just a form of sustenance, but every culture has a different way of eating, of preparing different varieties of food. It is a form of cultural identity and expression. Why are people in direct provision denied the right to prepare their own food, to eat fresh, healthy food, to pass recipes on to their children? Instead, they must resort to buying cheap, ready-to-eat foods such as bread or biscuits. It's shocking. If the government is going to force people to live in these conditions, the least that could be given is a chance to cook. Surely it costs more to contract a company to cook this food. This is just a further degradation to the thousands of people being failed daily by the state. Cases of young people displaying signs of inappropriate sexualised behaviour, of parents being hospitalised with mental health problems, of women forced into prostitution or single-parent families having to share a room with total strangers have all been reported to social services. As someone elected to represent my constituents in this chamber, I am appalled. I am clearly not the only one. Government ministers and backbenchers must see these cases and recoil in horror. You have the responsibility to change it. This is state-sponsored social exclusion and poverty. This government must act now, end direct provision, protect vulnerable children. Do not allow for this to be the scandal for future governments are forced to apologise for. Already, though, this may prove to be too late.
Deputy MacDonald.
Let me say at the outset, we in Sinn Féin believe that the direct provision is not acceptable for anybody and should be brought to an end without delay. It's a system that is suited to nobody, beneficial to nobody, but least of all to children. It institutionalises people, damages mental health, denies family privacy, and forces a lack of work on people. People living under direct provision are forced by the state to live in inhumane conditions. And these, as we know, are people who have often escaped their country of origin due to persecution, intimidation and violence. They're forced to raise their children in cramped conditions with virtually no disposable income, no resources to provide their children with basics, often such as school books, and no power over what they feed their children even. At the end of last year, 1,666 children were living in this system. Many of them indeed have spent their entire childhoods in this regime. Little wonder then that the Irish Refugee Council CEO, Sue Conlon, reported in April of this year that she personally knows of 3 asylum seeker children aged between 11 years and 17 years who have expressed suicidal thoughts. Little wonder that we saw such unrest over the summer in centres in Foynes, Athlone and Cork. In 2011, the Irish Refugee Council received correspondence from a family's general practitioner stating that 3 children were sharing one bed in one room with their parents in a separate bed. The family requested a transfer to a different hostel or for an adjoining room based on overcrowding. The Irish Refugee Council was assured that the family was provided with an additional cot and that the room met the relevant codes and requirements. The family remains in one room. In 2012, a concerned father reported that his children were living in close proximity to men who are not known to them and people with severe mental health conditions. The children, along with their family, remain in this centre. In 2012, a child presented hungry to the Irish Refugee Council on 2 occasions because she said she could not eat the reheated fried food provided for lunch. She couldn't sleep at night due to the noise at the centre and slept in until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, missing breakfast as a result. The child was afraid to report this due to her fear of being transferred. A woman living in the Eglinton hostel in Salt Hill in Galway spoke in April about her experience of the asylum system, and she recounted one particular day when a fellow resident received documentation permitting them to remain in Ireland. The woman's 4-year-old child asked when they were leaving the Eglinton too. When it was explained to the child that they had to wait for their papers, the child brought some paper to her mother, gave it to her and said, "Mummy, take it and let's leave." That day I cried, she said. I cried. I looked at the 4 corners of my room and I cried. What makes this situation, Minister, all the more distressing is that it's absolutely unnecessary. The Minister could, should she choose, abolish the direct provision system tomorrow, and that's what should be done. It has no legislative basis whatsoever. Indeed, it was a rush job by Fianna Fáil back in 1999 and bears all the hallmarks of that era: a complete lack of accountability and poor institutional oversight. And so we don't have to wait for the immigration, residence and protection legislation to be passed in order to put a stop to direct provision. The only people benefiting from this system are the companies who provide services used by those seeking asylum, who are in receipt of huge sums of money. In my view, and if a rational view prevailed, that money could be better spent. There is, as you know, Minister, an issue surrounding the awarding of contracts for the provision of services and their procurement. How come it seems to go to the same companies all of the time? How often are these contracts awarded? Here in this Dáil and throughout the country, we have rightly expressed our horror and indeed our shame at the treatment of children in industrial schools, in Magdalen laundries, in mother and baby homes. And yet, as we speak on these subjects, abuses happen in centres across the country. It's happening before our very eyes. We have no excuse, we have no alibi for treating people in this way. So, Minister, without doubt, we need a reformed, a robust, an efficient and a human rights compliant asylum process, and direct provision has absolutely no part in that.
Mulhern, I understand you're sharing your time with Deputies Ferris, Doyle, Murphy, Doherty, Conway, Barry, Byrne and Walsh. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Deputy Mulhern,
Cathaoirleach.
3 minutes.
There is no reason to be a refugee if one only exchanges one set of fears for others. With this in mind, when we look at our asylum seekers, we need to ask if we can honestly say that they are free from fear of persecution. The UN Refugee Convention says, fear of persecution looks not only to the past, not only to the present, but looks to the future. In short, it looks at what the future promises. Every person looks to the future not only for oneself, but especially for one's children. It is in considering their future that many have left their country of origin, fearing for their own and their children's future. The emergent refugee situation in Ireland, in which asylum seekers are held for years in what can be only described as camps, is worrying. It breeds fear of worse to come. As attested by many requests which I have received for intervention, both in my capacity as a solicitor and as a politician, I am aware at least of some of these cases personally. Many are known to me personally and their families. In this regard, it is obvious that the asylum situation is creating a new kind of fear for the refugee and their children, some of whom are Irish-born and will no doubt grow up as Irish. It is not in the best Irish interest that they grow up already with a sense of discrimination for a history they had no say in. It is an avoidable situation if we act now, so as not to experience what we have witnessed in other countries which have a longer experience of displaced persons. I welcome, Minister, the action that has been taken now, the roundtable consultation which has already taken place, and the future working group. Clearly, action needs to be swift. We need to immediately look to creating a system where when people present themselves, it can be dealt with in an expeditious way. We have people in these asylum centres who have great talents, who have a lot to offer to our country, who want to work, who want to self-fulfil, the exact same that all the rest of us want to do. But we have a process which qualifies them or not. The process has taken way too long, and we know that's why they're in these centres. And I think it's a matter of urgency for the confidence of the Irish public, I mean the Irish citizen public, and for the people who are seeking asylum. In the more immediate term, though, and considering all the graphic accounts we've had of the distressing situations and the low standards in some of these direct provision, I think immediately we need to be able to ensure that families, and particularly children in there, have been looked after properly. I know it's been said, but we know the history of it in our own country. We don't need to look maybe to displaced persons in other countries. We know what happens when the state ignores what's going on in institutions, and I believe we have learned our lesson, and now the evidence of that will be how swiftly all these changes will be implemented. Thank you.
3 minutes. Deputy First, 3 minutes. No, first. Yeah.
Sorry, Cahill. Minister, there's a story we have all heard before. It's about a little blonde boy with no name, although in some places he's called Peter and in other places he's called Hans. The little boy lived in Holland, where, as we know, the land is permanently under sea level and is saved from flooding only by an elaborate series of dams or dikes. The little boy, we are told, was walking home from school one day when he saw water trickling through a hole in the dike wall. He knew immediately that if the hole wasn't plugged, the water would eventually breach the dam, causing death and catastrophe across the Netherlands. So the story goes, the boy put his chubby little finger in the hole and saved the day. Minister, you will no doubt forgive me for pointing out the obvious here. In terms of the situation before the House today, you are that little boy with his finger in the dam, as successive ministers before you have been for decades. When it comes to European immigration, the European Union is well below sea level. The opportunities and protections offered to those lucky enough to be deemed citizens of Europe are desired and envied throughout the world. At any given time, there are millions of people outside the EU desperately trying to get in. As a member of this club of 28 countries, Ireland shares border control obligations with other member states. We in Ireland are used to thinking of the word border in relation to Northern Ireland, but in European terms, our entire coastline and our airports are our border. Being a member of the European club effectively means that our country is surrounded by a large legislative dike designed for controlling floods of immigration into Europe. But the difference between us and the little Dutch boy is that in the fable, the people in charge eventually came along to save the boy and fix the structural deficiencies in the dam. Europe, on the other hand, has failed to adequately address the serious structural inadequacies in the EU's immigration policy. The really tragic aspect to this is that hundreds of thousands of people who desperately need the safety and sanctuary of the EU to escape political and social persecution in other countries have been abandoned on the high seas, sometimes literally. There is an unfortunately named European Union regulation called Dublin III. Under the terms of Dublin III, an application for asylum must be processed by the member state where the applicant first entered Europe. So, for example, if an asylum seeker arrived here via Northern Ireland or Britain or a French port, that asylum seeker must be sent back to the UK or France or whatever other country where he or she first set foot in Europe. This is a system that causes much upset and frustration to vulnerable people in need of assistance, and is also a source of potential legal challenge and delay. All decisions made by the Irish authorities in relation to applications for asylum are public sector decisions and therefore open to full judicial review by the courts. Many legal challenges can take years to make their way through our clogged-up court system. Perhaps our new Court of Appeal will help that situation, but for most asylum seekers, adults and children, the wait has been too long. One significant problem is that a common European-wide approach is not being applied to the assessment of asylum seeker applications for residency. Each country is expected to manage its own hole in the dam wall. The opposition motion before us today would merely have us covering the hole with sticking plaster. There is a need for a new European legislation to allow national authorities and courts to fast-track applications through a common EU-wide methodology, but this has not yet happened.
Deputy, your time is up.
I'm just finishing now. Courtesy of Europe, we have had a new fast-track system for processing mega wind farm applications, but not for asylum seekers. It is time now that something was done to help all these people in direct provision. Thank you.
Deputy Doyle, you have three minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Could I welcome the opportunity to speak on this, private members, and to thank the members of the technical group for bringing up a subject that could easily be just pushed to the background and lost in the heat of other matters that seem to sometimes come before this House that are of a more pressing nature. I was a new councillor in 1999, and like Deputy Byrne, I think we were on the newly formed Eastern Regional Health Authority when this piece of legislation was brought in, or this system, direct provision. And when you look back to that time, the reason it was brought in was because of what was then an influx of asylum seekers into Ireland, because the UK changed its rules with regard to how asylum seekers were supported and treated. And I think Deputy Ferris has touched on it on a European scale. The Common Travel Area means that people can freely move between Ireland and the UK and Britain. Anyway, we don't have a system that's in harmony across the EU, so people can decide where they might feel that they have the best opportunity as asylum seekers. So I think it needs to be harmonised. No matter what level of accommodation or standard of accommodation is provided for asylum seekers, they are in limbo. They're not going to stay there forever, or at least they shouldn't. They shouldn't expect that they're going to stay there forever. So I think the whole issue around how swiftly they can be processed through the initial asylum assessment, consideration and legal challenges, if that's what happens, and does happen on more often than not. So I think that all of those factors have to be addressed. I welcome the fact that the Minister, upon attaining office, has gone out and visited some of the centres and seen for himself, and his Minister Fitzgerald have seen them for themselves, the standard that isn't there for these people. They do deserve better. I agree with Deputy MacDonald with regard to the issue of procurement and tendering, that if the provisions that are being provided at the moment for these people are not up to standard, I don't see why, if a certain standard, and they are being paid for, is not presented or provided, then they shouldn't be considered again. And I think we have no quality evaluation of how these centres are run. There's the good and the bad, and I certainly know some of the smaller ones that seem to be better run than the others. But we still have the issue of the length of time people stay in these centres. So I think we have to address it. I hope that the initial steps taken by the ministers will continue, and that we will be back here, but with a resolution fairly soon. But I do agree again with Deputy Ferris that simply to adopt this motion that's here before us would only provide another sticking plaster, wouldn't address the issue in its entirety. Thank you.
Deputy Owen Murphy, 3 minutes.
That's Concola, and I'd just like to welcome the Minister in his appointment. And I think some of the things that you've been saying, Minister, since you came into the job on this issue are very important. But the direct provision system is a disgrace, and it really shames us as a nation and a people. It's one of the first things that came across my desk when I was elected to Dublin City Council, and I deal with it weekly still, and it is appalling. I mean, I believe it's a form of institutional racism. We wouldn't treat white Americans this way. We just wouldn't. I've had one person who used to come into me, already ordered to be deported. Every 2 weeks he goes, and they say, we're not deporting you this week, come back in 2 weeks. For years, that's gone on. And he knows that if he goes home, that his life is at risk. But he's just saying, deport me. Just do something. Another person who was lucky to find a benefactor to sponsor their master's education, and when the hole he was in found out that he was getting this education, they stopped giving him his lunch. I had to go to the Secretary General of the Department of Justice to get his lunch back. It's disgraceful. I know you feel the same. I know we need to do something on it, but we cannot let ourselves get to the next general election without having properly addressed this. I believe the only proper way and the only fair way to do it is with an amnesty. I know that will be palatable to some. We pick a year, if it's 4 years, whatever it might be, and say, we've made a mistake here. We need to treat you better, and you're more than welcome to this country. Because people who've come through the system, who've gotten a chance to become Irish citizens, I mean, the difference you see, and I've seen it happen for people who've been coming to my office and now they're citizens, it's amazing. And they're making a contribution, and it's great. And I really think that with all the different legacies that we will leave behind us as a government in the 4 or 5 years that we have, economic, etc., this has to be tackled. It has to be resolved. I do think amnesty is the only way to do it. I'll ask you to consider it. Thank you.
Come back with Deputy Regina Doherty. 4 minutes.
I want to thank the opposition for bringing this private members bill, but also in particular, Minister, for your interest in this particular topic and in rectifying the situation that has existed for far too long. I want to tell you about a little fella that I became friends with in July this year. He's 7 years of age. His name is Sean Daniel. He lived in Portlaoise for 6 years, and he was moved to a detention centre, a reception centre in my constituency in March of this year. He has severe autism, and actually he's really severe, and I have experience of meeting children, and he has special dietary needs, and he still wears nappies because he hasn't managed to learn how to go to the toilet yet. His mother is abused in the most horrific way by, if she doesn't toe the line and do what certain people want her to do in her reception centre, his food is withheld from her. She has special food that's given to her on a weekly basis so that she can cook for him, because obviously his dietary needs are so severe. His food is withheld from her if she doesn't dance to the tune of the people in the kitchen in this reception centre. There was an incident during the summer whereby she got involved in an altercation with somebody in the kitchen because of the food, and a guard allegedly assaulted her until she was intimidated to go and give bloods in Drogheda so that he could prove that there was nothing physically wrong with him as a result of her biting him during this alleged assault. They withheld Sean Daniel's nappies. Now, he couldn't go back to school in September because he had no nappies until he got a call from the school to say that the school would give him nappies. But the school gives him 2 nappies a day. He's 7. The woman is stitching the nappies together during the daytime so that she can dry them out and put them on him tonight or tomorrow. Now, of all of the other issues that are, and there are plenty with regard to the fact that people are in these reception centres for far too long, the fact that there are loopholes, the fact that we don't give them any money, any liberty, any ability to work, all of that's horrendous, but just leave that aside for a second. The intimidation and the abuse that's happening, this woman who's on her own and her 7-year-old severely autistic child, is an absolute disgrace. And when I rang and I reported it to the Child and Family Agency, the procedures that happened was that the lady that I spoke to rang the provision centre, spoke to the manager, who told her, oh God, no, that's not true. She gets her food every week, she's getting nappies for months. And this woman rings me back and says, yeah, don't worry about it, you're being told a lie. Now, I've been up in this lady's house, and I'll use that word very loosely, every week since July. It's not a lie. And actually, it beggars more questions that the lady in the Child and Family Agency was quite willing to take the manager's response as gospel without investigating herself. But I've reported that to the Minister for Children. This is wrong. HICWA issued draft national guidelines this week for standards in our special care units, which are units, obviously, that children have to go to at a very, very last resort. I'm asking you in the interim period, while your report group comes back, and I really appreciate that you're doing this, and please God, they'll come back far quicker than some of our other special working groups have done, apply those draft guidelines to the reception and integration centres. Appoint a champion for people who are going through the years of processes that we're making them go through. Give somebody the responsibility to be their champion, to be their go-to person, because right now they have nobody. Right now they're coming to Owen Murphy's office, to my office. It's appalling. The standards, they're not even standards. The complete lack of care that we have for human beings in this country. We talk about legacy issues in Ireland gone past, where we talk about a different time and a different culture and things that were acceptable because we didn't talk about them. Right now, right here today in 2014, we're doing exactly the same under our watch. So make changes now. Let the working group go and have a wider issue of the whole process, change it, but make immediate changes now and make a real impact on the people's lives who are in limbo in this country.
Now call Deputy Ciara Conway.
Minister, you can't be but moved when you hear stories like that both Deputy Murphy and Deputy Doherty have recounted to us tonight. And for anybody who's a parent, one of the nicest things in the world is to be able to cook for your children. And that is something. These are women and fathers and families who have been stripped away from their home place, have been stripped away from what they know because they were in fear of their lives. Are we saying that we don't believe these people? Because I know I wouldn't choose to live in one room and food be given up to me that I can't give my children. Because do you know what? Children are finicky eaters. There's not a mother in Ireland that doesn't try to coax their children with one food or another. But if you're a mother in a direct provision centre, you don't have that luxury. If they don't eat it, they go hungry. And this has been, you know this, Minister, I know you do, and it has been written about and reported by the Irish Refugee Council about the malnutrition that the children in these centres are experiencing. Like, have we learned nothing as a country? You know, we have another institution that is creaking and croning along. I am very glad to Deputy Pringle for him bringing the motion before the House tonight. I mean, it's something that the Labour Party has spoken up about before. And now that we're in government, I am very glad, Minister, that you have been given responsibility, along with your colleague Frances Fitzgerald, to address this issue. And I welcome what you're doing in relation to the roundtable discussions and to report about how we can fix the system as a whole. But in the here and now, there are very practical things that we as a government can no longer stand over. When you hear the stories that Deputy Doherty talks about, a very ill child and his welfare being played with like a game of ping pong between the people who run the centres and the woman who's trying to rear her child on her own in a foreign country away from her family. And these people come to my clinic every week. People who are in absolute turmoil because they don't know what's happening from week to week. They no longer fear, they not only fear being returned to their own country, but they live in fear here because they don't know when that knock will come. They don't know how they can plan their weeks ahead. And the instability that that brings to a parent, and how that instability manifests itself in a child who's shy, withdrawn, unable to cope in school. These are children who were born in Ireland. We owe these children and these families an immediate solution to the kind of carry-on that's going on right around the country. And not only children and families, but single men who are often placed in big, bulging hostels. There's one in my own constituency on the quay in Waterford. But you have men from all over the world put into dormitory-style accommodation, men who suffer from mental health difficulties, who indulge in alcohol abuse, and others who don't. And the fear that they live in. They come to my office saying they haven't slept in weeks. That is no way to treat anybody who comes to our shores looking for help. And I, like Deputy Murphy, have seen that transition, the transformation that happens when they get their red passport with the harp on the front of it. And they have so much to offer and so much to bring to our society, to our communities. And they're doing it already. I don't need to be convinced of that. I don't think anybody does. They enrich our communities, they enrich our society. And I would echo Deputy Murphy's call for an amnesty. I believe we need, as a government, for once and for all, to close direct provision and to have an amnesty for those who are caught in a system of our making. Okay, we weren't in government when it came in, but we're here now, and my God, we better do something about it.
Deputy Tom Barry, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ciara. Look, I welcome the opportunity to speak on this. It's a very important issue. I certainly feel that there's merit in an amnesty type approach at present, because we simply cannot have people in a country for this length of time, and their kids born here and all that goes with it. The problem we have here is that we've never had a proper discussion on it. You see, why have we this many people here, and why are they being processed so slowly? Are we looking for such a burden of proof that it will never be got? We need to work to a timescale here where we can work out if the people's story is genuine and if this country has an obligation to take them in. Remember that this system is not here to take everybody in. It's here to take the people who absolutely have no other refuge to go to. But maybe we need to discuss this also. Do we take in everybody who wants to come in? You know, I don't ever remember this discussion taking place. I feel personally we have an obligation to those souls who are crossing into Italy on a regular basis, dying in the seas. I feel we have an obligation to the Syrian people who are crossing into Turkey. Turkey has taken over 1.5 million people. You know, we need to start looking at this and being responsible Europeans. And it's fine to condemn what's happening out there, but we need to actually look at it and say, what can we do? These centres have probably reached their term. They need to be dealt with quickly. We probably also need oversight, and I hate to bring it in, but the stories aren't always negative. There are some really good people working in these centres. I spoke to a chef who works in one of those centres only 2 days ago because I was concerned over what we heard. And he tells me, look, we're giving the best of Irish food. I can understand the arguments about children's, you know, and wanting to cook for themselves, but the practicalities of families cooking for themselves could be very difficult as it stands. But certainly the food they're getting, and we are a food nation, we produce the best quality food. And I'm glad to say that at least they're getting 3 choices for dinner and 3 choices for lunch. And, you know, I have to defend the food, because I just feel that in fairness, you know, and the people in there, the majority of them, I guess, are doing the best they can to provide as best a living environment as there. But now that this discussion is taking place, are we going to talk about it sensibly? Are we going to process people who come into our shores quicker? And have we got the gumption to refuse people who we do not want to come in? Because there might be people there who might not be an addition to our society. They might be people involved in terrorism and all other things. We don't know. But we need to be aware of that, because that's something that we cannot inflict on our people. And also, you know, it's taxpayers' money is paying for this. And I think if we have a proper discussion around it, the future will be better not only for this country, but for the people who seek our help.
Come on, Deputy Eric Byrne. 4 minutes.
Say it all in 3 minutes. In 4 minutes I have I? Okay.
4
Look, there's nobody in this House cannot be but moved at the horrendous plight and sight of the bodies on the beaches of dead asylum seekers. It's an horrendous scene. The fact that so many of them have been sacrificed, even on the high seas, by unscrupulous human traffickers, is a blight on the face of humanity. Men, women and children are being sacrificed by these evil traffickers of human beings, some of whom find security in whatever land they arrive. Now, these people are essentially just searching for a better life. In fact, when we're talking about refugees, can I compliment the Irish government and successive governments at how professionally we do handle what we call the programmed refugees from Bosnia, from various countries in the world. Programmed refugees are the genuine refugees that are being facilitated through the United Nations and being relocated in countries. We do a brilliant job on their behalf. The same cannot be said about direct provision. I have experience of direct provision. I stayed a night in New Ross, and I could see the terrible problems of, if it be a single man having to share his room with another person from a different nationality, maybe different religion. We saw the difficulties with the dietary demands of the various diverse groups that are there. It creates nothing but tension, distrust, and, as people have rightly said, there's an element of mental illness sets in. can I say to the Minister, it is absolutely unacceptable that anybody can spend 2 years, 4 years, 7 years or 8 years incarcerated in a building for these people. The question I want to put to the Minister is, what the hell is happening? What is the system today that cannot make decisions more quickly than over a period of 7 to 8 years? Why does anybody require to be processed over a 2-year period? It's unbelievable. Now, the question for the Minister is it the legal process? Is there an indefinite conclusion to the legal processes that people can avail of? And I think in greater, it might be controversial for me to say it, but I'll say it in any case, it may very well be more humane, rather than incarcerate a person for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years in a direct provision hostel, that if a decision was taken much more quickly, either to facilitate them or to deport them, that I think the Irish state will be behaving in a more humane way. There's nothing as horrendous as sitting it out in one of these hostels, wondering, will I get accepted at the end of it? Can you imagine being deported after 7 years or 8 years? Minister, there has to be other international comparisons to make. There has to be other systems throughout the world, throughout Europe, that is superior to ours. And I plead to the Minister to try and learn from our counterparts. And I say there is good news and then there's bad news. I am personally dealing with a young Nigerian girl who's 17 years of age, who, notwithstanding the fact that she's in the care of the local authority, of the health board, she's in care, had a horrendous childhood. She's an unaccompanied minor, horrendous childhood. Yet, during her leaving certificate exams, she got the highest marks in the school, over and above everybody else.
Thank you, Deputy.
Her problem is she's been accepted into Trinity College under the BESS, Business, Economics and Social Studies. She's going to be 18 in December. She's going to be moved to, guess where? Direct provision. God knows where. That is not a humane way of approaching kids who have overcome such terrible difficulties. Their life could be, they would be very proud of Ireland. Ireland is her home, and we've got to really change the rules that could disperse her anywhere. Thank you very much.
Deputy Brian Welsh. 3 minutes.
Firstly, I want to compliment the members opposite the technical group for introducing this important motion, in particular Deputy Pringle for the work he's done, because it really has facilitated an important debate and a very constructive debate so far, what I've witnessed of it, in relation to this very important issue. So well done, Deputy Pringle and your colleagues. I think any member who has ever had any contact with an asylum seekers would agree that the system is in need of urgent reform. The system basically is a mess. People are spending too much time in direct provision centres, in some cases that I've come across up to 9 years. Conditions that they have to endure in these centres are appalling. The weekly payments that they receive are derisory, and they're an insult to an adult and indeed a child to give the derisory figures that are being offered. And in many ways that payment is reflective of an outdated and an inadequate system as a whole. I welcome your appointment, Minister, to this role. I was very pleased to see that you were allocated this portfolio, because I know from what you have said here in this House and from reading some of the statements that you've made in relation to this issue that you are passionate about this, that you have a genuine interest in progressing this area, and that you are sincere in dealing with this matter. Quite frankly, as I said, the system as it has operated for the past 14 years, it's not fit for purpose, Las Concorda, and we've treated occupants of these centres in a way that can only be described as shameful. Reflecting on our own history, it would suggest that we should know better. So many countries around the world have welcomed Irish people with open arms over the years, and we therefore have a moral obligation to protect vulnerable people who come to our state fleeing other countries. In recent times, a light has been shone on episodes of our nation's past when networks of immoral and dehumanising institutions were allowed to prevail against a background of indifference, I suppose, on the part of the state. The shameful details that emerged on, for example, Magdalene laundries and more recently mother and baby homes have shocked the nation and ought to weigh heavily on our collective conscience as we deal with this matter. That those dark institutions were allowed to operate as they did and for as long as they did is an indelible black mark against us as a people and against us as a state. But one thing about our failings in the past is that they should heighten our resolve that no such failings should ever occur here again in the future. And regretful as I listen to the contributions of members from all sides of the House in relation to the direct provision system, I have to wonder if we have adequately learned from our mistakes in the past, or if we have, in the midst of failing another vulnerable section of society by consigning them to punitive existence behind the closed doors of direct provision centres. I welcome the appointment of the Working Group, Minister. I hope they won't delay in reporting back to you so that we can move quickly to progress this matter.
Thank you. Now, Deputy John Halligan and I called him sharing with his own time, and Deputy Joan Collins, Claire Daly, Richard Boyd Barrett, Tom Fleming. Yeah.
Thank you, I'm sharing a minute with Deputy Matthews. Well, first of all, I wanted to congratulate Deputy Pringle for bringing this very important motion to the House. It appears to me that many of the deputies on the government side have made a compelling case for supporting this private member's business tonight. I would be bitterly disappointed reading down through it and having spoken to people in Amnesty International and other groups that if it was voted down, and particularly I would be very disappointed by the Labour Party if they voted against this tonight. It's been stated on a number of occasions that the rise in asylum applications has to do with, if you like, one's impression as to whether the economy is improving right across Europe. And the number of asylum seekers have increased right across Europe. But the Refugee Council of Ireland have stated quite categorically that we're now seeing the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. And this has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with an improving economy, if we agree that the economy is improving in Ireland. It's to do with the horrendous and inhuman conditions that many millions of people are suffering right around the world. Where human rights are non-existent, no religious freedom, no political freedom. As a matter of fact, there is no freedom of expression. So sentient human beings deserve that and deserve a quality of life, and they strive, if conditions are poor and if conditions are bad. This has happened since the beginning of time, that they move on and move their families on so that they can better their lives and better their conditions. So where do they look to? They look to the democratic process across Europe. They look to France, they look to England, they look to Ireland, and they look to other countries. And they hear of Ireland, of how pleasant we are, the island of 100,000 welcomes, and then they arrive and we incarcerate. There's a lot of students outside the Dáil tonight, none of them refugees, by the way, and they all have a sign up, and it's on the sign is 10 years in jail. And essentially, that's what we're doing to human beings that come into this country and ask for our help. We're here talking about people that are experiencing the type of life that none of us would ever wish to partly experience. I spoke to a chap during the week whose brother had had his 2 hands cut off in the warfare that's taken part in parts of Nigeria between Christians and Muslims, and had both his grandparents burned to death. They had no choice but to leave. They had no choice but to come to Europe. They had no choice but to seek out a democracy like Ireland in the hope that they would be treated with respect and treated with dignity. And that's not the case. And these institutions, as I will call them, I think the civil servants should hang their heads in shame that they've set out these procedures. Because I know you didn't do it, and I don't think the previous minister done it. Somebody did. Somebody set out a sequence of events, and somebody set out a procedure as to how you live in these institutions. And it's probably somebody that's never met an immigrant. It must be. Because if you did, and you saw the conditions they were living in, you wouldn't do it. It's institutional racism. That's what it is. And I've only a minute left, and I'll say this. If conditions arose in this country where thousands of people had to leave because of political persecution or religious persecution or personal persecution, it would be interesting to find out if they arrived in England or America or Australia, would they be incarcerated for 10 years? What would we think? And looking ahead, what would we think if we thought that is what might happen to them? We can't wait a year, Minister. We can't wait 6 months. You must have visited some of these centres. I have. You must have seen how children are being brought up, where their breakfast, they stand in line for their breakfast every morning and stand in line for their dinner every morning for 10 years, or from the time they can stand, 3, 4 years of age. It's appalling and outrageous. You should really support this motion tonight.
Margaret's Deputy Peter Matthews, nominated one.
Count Corla. First of all, thank you very much, Deputy Halligan, for giving me a minute of your time, and thank you especially to Deputy Pringle for bringing forward this private member's bill. I just want to say in my minute that a couple of years ago I visited one of these direct provision centres, and I was actually crushed to see what was there. It was an affront to human rights, an affront to human liberty, an affront to human dignity. And it has to stop. It really has to stop. It's wrong to ask people who have already been so disadvantaged and crushed to live in a timeless vacuum with a loss of dignity and all those things I've just alluded to was just plain wrong. I was actually deeply saddened by it, and I haven't forgotten it. And that was a few years ago. Thank you. Last Cahill.
Deputy Joan Collins.
Thank you. I welcome the fact that Deputy Thomas Pringle has brought this private member's bill into the chamber, and I think it should be made clear that Deputy Pringle brought this a year ago into the legislative process and hadn't had an opportunity to actually have it on the floor until tonight. So it's not just an issue responding to the circumstances and the protests that asylum seekers have come out around the community, and I applaud them for doing that and highlighting their plight in the despicable circumstances that they're living in. I think it seems to be the case that despite abject apologies and expressions of shame about the inhumane treatment and incarceration in the industrial schools, the mental institutions in this country, the Magdalene laundries, the mother and baby homes, the health service in relation to symphysiotomy, where the state outsourced its responsibility to religious institutions and then forgot about them. That we now have a repeat of the situation in direct provision centres for asylum seekers. The difference is that they've been outsourced to for-profit private companies. No wonder Judge Catherine McGuinness has said it is a new scandal which will bring yet more international shame and yet another apology from the state. 4,360 people, 1,700 of them children, are being forced to live in inhumane conditions of overcrowding, forbidden to cook their own food, a family in one room, shared bathrooms, afraid to make complaints. And it's an incredible situation for people to be living in this country in this period of time. And when I listened to the story of the woman in Cork yesterday who protested that she was in the direct provision for 9 years with her 2 children, who've never seen their mammy cook a family meal. It's an incredible situation, and with no idea when her application is going to be dealt with. And in some ways, I think it can be compared to interment without trial, because you're in a situation where you don't know when your application is going to be processed, and you don't know how long it's going to be. It's like putting something along and how long is a piece of string. You just don't know what's going to happen. Your children are in that situation as well. These conditions are extremely detrimental to people's mental health and the healthy, rounded-out development of children. This is widely recognised from the Human Rights Council of the UN, which expressed concerns about the length of time people are in centres, the limits on the freedom, the impediments to family life, and the prohibition on working. The EU Commission on Racism and Intolerance has called for a complete review of the system, to the Special Rapporteur on Child Protection, plus all of the organisations in Ireland concerned with civil liberties, migrant rights, asylum seekers and so on. We know the system is not fit for purpose, and the question is what to do and to do it now. Now, the Minister has said that he has a working group set up. Excellent, it's a first step. All the concerned groups are involved in that. You're not expecting the first report back until the end of the year. In the meantime, these people are still in the same situation. I think that some of the suggestions that Deputy Pringle has put down here for very immediate things that can be done should be taken on board. That is, anyone in the system over 6 months should be immediately given the right to independent living. That we should immediately conform with the norm across the EU by conceding the right to work after 6 months for those people who are in direct provision. Establish independent complaints and inspection mechanisms. Make all centres provide self-catering facilities, play space and study rooms for children, basic human rights for children. These are immediate measures which would greatly alleviate the present problems, and in the longer term we should move to specialised reception centres operated for a not-for-profit basis as recommended in the motion. And can I just make a final point in relation to this? We're talking about trying to, and many people have made impassioned contributions tonight about direct dealings with people that are in these centres. We also have a huge housing crisis, and we're talking about putting people into prefabs. I mean, it's just not on, and I think what there has to be is a longer-term programme to deal with the long-term issues, and immediate assistance put in place to deal with the immediate effects of homelessness and on the direct provision situation.
Now call Deputy Claire Daly.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. I too would like to congratulate Deputy Pringle and strongly support the motion, which I think puts forward an immediate solution to this issue, a human rights-based, humane approach to an issue which has been ignored for far too long. And I think it is the case that the nonsense that used to be put forward, that Ireland is an island of 1,000 welcomes, has certainly long been exposed. We're a country which has been quite happy over generations to send our young, our poor people to the ends of the earth because this country wasn't prepared to provide them with a decent standard of living. We were quite happy to send women who had children outside marriage as outcasts to other countries and expect those people to be taken on there, to expect our citizens who we weren't prepared to look after be welcomed with open arms in other shores. We'd hear things constantly, sure, everybody loves the Irish. Isn't it great? Aren't we the people who built Britain? We're great workers and all the rest. But when people come here trying to earn a living for themselves and a better life for their families, it's an entirely different matter. You know, it used to be said there's never any racism in Ireland. Well, there wasn't when there was never any people from other countries who wanted to come living here. But once they did, that situation changed quite differently. And the attitude of the state and the policies put in place by the state has been a huge contributor to that situation, primarily through the denial of people's right to work. Now, you know, I think the issues are much more starkly posed when you look at the scenario being faced by refugees and asylum seekers, and the points have been made by other deputies about the obstacles that those people have to overcome, just the horror in their own country to flee here. And they see Ireland as a safe haven, somewhere to build a new future. The decision to come to Ireland can have devastating consequences for people, and primarily I think that's graphically illustrated in the case of women. Women often held in direct provision centres in close proximity, for example, maybe to an abusive partner that they can't get away from. Women and girls who are pregnant and seeking asylum in Ireland, as Niall Bean from the Irish Family Planning Association said, really find themselves at the intersection of two state systems that deny them their basic dignity. Direct provision on the one hand and our lack of abortion facilities on the other, both of which have been criticised by by human rights bodies as violating human rights, discriminating and stigmatising people. And obviously that was graphically exposed in the case of Miss Y, who was a resident in a direct provision centre. And you'd have to ask the question, had she been given access to greater support in the community, would that have been different? Because it is the case, because of that restriction, we've had people forced to parent in a direct provision or reception centre, and it's just not good enough. Now, the figures have been out there, thousands of people, almost 2,000 of them children, temporary accommodation which was intended for 6 months, they're living there for on average 4 years, in many cases 7, in some cases 10. Children growing up in these places. I mean, imagine spending 4 years out of work with no possibility of getting a job. Imagine trying to raise your children